This happened back in '97, when logging was a way of life for many in the Pacific Northwest. The Olympic Peninsula swallowed sound. That's the first thing you realize when you get dropped deep into the old growth, miles from pavement, miles from civilization. The air itself was thick, heavy with the scent of pine needle decay and damp earth, filtering out any noise beyond the immediate, localized thrum of your own blood in your ears. It was just me, Ben, Marcus, and Finn. 4 men dropped into a small, temporary clearing we called the Cedar Line, named for the behemoths we were here to fell. We were 3 weeks in, which is just long enough for the novelty to wear off and the routine to become a grinding reality. Marcus, our foreman, was built like a fire hydrant and had the temperament to match. He lived for the sound of a roaring chainsaw and the thud of timber. Ben, a mountain of a man with hands permanently stained by pitch, was my rigging partner. Strong, quiet, dependable. And then there was Finn. Finn was different. He was the kind of man who moved through the woods like he was part of the fog, older than the rest of us combined, with eyes that seemed to look through the trees, not just at them. He was the one I'd come to realize who knew this land better than it knew itself. Our camp was basic, 3 canvas tents pitched around a central fire pit, a stack of diesel cans for the skidder, and a small tarped-off cache for our tools, the Stihl chainsaws, the heavy wedges, and the expensive radio comms unit. We worked sun-up to sundown, the forest ringing with the cacophony of modern industry, trying to chew away at the silent, centuries-old tapestry of the woods. It was exhausting work, soul-crushing in its relentless physicality, but profitable enough to justify the isolation. The first strange event wasn't scary, just wrong. It was a Tuesday, I think. We were asleep, or trying to be. The night was moonless, with absolute zero visibility beyond the dying coals of the fire. The rain, which had been a steady, rhythmic drumming on the canvas, abruptly stopped. That's when the silence came. The kind of silence that doesn't feel restful, but predatory. Then I heard it. A deep, guttural sound, like a chesty cough layered over the sound of a boulder being scraped across gravel. It wasn't a howl of a wolf or a shriek of a cougar. It had too much weight behind it. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my voice sounding thin and small in the overwhelming dark. From the tent next to mine, Marcus snorted, "Bear, get back to sleep, Jake." But it wasn't a bear. I know bears. They grunt, they sniff, they break branches. This sound was intelligent, almost mournful, and it seemed to travel through the very ground. It vibrated in my teeth. The sound faded, but about an hour later, something much closer happened. The ground outside our tent felt like it shuddered. Once, twice. Thump, thump. Like someone dropped a pair of fully loaded 50-gallon drums 10 feet away. Not running, not sneaking, just walking with an absolute, undeniable heaviness. I held my breath, listening, sweat cold on my forehead. The walking stopped right beside our tarped-off gear cache. I heard the faint metallic clink of something being nudged. In the morning, the air was sharp with the freshness of the preceding rain, but the tension hadn't washed away. We gathered by the fire, nursing black coffee. "Something was out there last night," I insisted, looking from Marcus to Ben. Ben just grunted, chewing on a piece of jerky, his focus already on the steel hooks of the choker chains. "It was a big cat, Jake," Marcus scoffed, running a calloused hand through his thin, sandy hair. "Or maybe a wind shear. Stop listening to the ghost stories." Finn, who had been staring into the fire, finally spoke, his voice dry as old moss. "Wasn't cat. Was heavy. Sounded like 2 tons of wet wool moving slow." He took a sip of his coffee, his gaze never leaving the shimmering heat haze above the coals. "Don't like what's out there. It's watching us. You cutting too close to the line, Marcus." Marcus just laughed, a harsh, dismissive bark. "The only line I'm cutting is the one that says this timber pays. You worry about your saw, Finn. We'll worry about the wildlife." I should have listened to Finn right then. But the sun was up, the diesel engine needed priming, and the sheer volume of work had a way of drowning out common sense and primal fear. The incident started small, almost ignorable. The first was the gas cans. We kept the diesel in heavy, regulation steel cans, secured with a thick nylon rope to the skidder frame. Wednesday morning, 4 of the 5 cans were found 50 feet downhill, scattered, some dented like someone had kicked them repeatedly with steel-toed boots. The rope was snapped, not cut, frayed and pulled apart as if by immense force.
"Bandits?" Ben asked, scratching his thick beard. "Bandits don't hike 6 hours into a clear-cut zone," Marcus growled, kicking a can. "Bear, definitely. Big grizzly got spooked, maybe. But bears don't neatly untie a professional knot before hauling the cans away. And they don't crush the sides in the manner of a human fist, just far, far stronger. The dents were concave, not clawed. They looked like giant thumbprints." Then came the tools. We used a heavy, specialty hydraulic wedge, worth a few $100s, to help drop the biggest trees in the right direction. It was always kept in the locked steel tool chest. Friday, we opened the chest. The wedge was bent. Not snapped, not scratched. Bent clean in the middle. The fixed steel distorted into a gentle, unusable curve. "What in the hell?" Marcus muttered, his face going pale beneath his tan. That was the first time I saw his unwavering confidence crack. This wasn't a bear. This was malicious, targeted destruction of something valuable and tough. "Only something with a hydraulic press could do that," I whispered, picking up the ruined tool. It felt wrong, unnaturally pliable, even though it was heavy steel. Finn was silent. He stood apart, pulling on a pair of leather work gloves, looking into the canopy. When he finally looked at us, his eyes held a profound, cold pity. "It's telling you to leave," Finn said simply. "You ignore the knocks and it starts breaking things. You ignore the breaking, it starts to get angry. It's the woods talking back, boys." "That's garbage, Finn," Marcus exploded, shaking his head violently, trying to cling to the rational world. "It's kids, maybe, or a rival crew trying to scare us off. Nobody bends steel by hand." "No man does," Finn agreed, turning his attention back to his chainsaw. He was sharpening the teeth meticulously, taking his time, as if preparing for a job that had nothing to do with cutting wood. "But there ain't no man out here but us, Jake." The vandalism escalated from annoying to catastrophic over the next week. It became clear that whatever was doing this was operating exclusively at night, moving like a phantom, utterly silent, and possessing strength that defied physics. First, the radio unit, our sole link to the outside world. A heavy-duty satellite communication rig was kept in a waterproof Pelican case. We found the case 2 days later, not just open, but peeled open. The metal hinges were ripped out of the hard plastic shell, the latches torn off. The radio inside was a flat smear of circuits and crushed plastic. It looked like someone had stepped on it, then ground the heel of a large boot into it for good measure. No signal, no communications, zero chance of calling in a rescue or medical help. We were truly, deeply alone. Marcus tried to keep us focused, but paranoia was setting in like a damp, chilling fog. We started sleeping in shifts, but nothing ever happened when we were awake. It was always during the 3 to 5 hours of deep, exhausted sleep that the forest moved against us. The worst damage came the day before the accident. Our pride and joy, the heavy skidder, a beast of a machine designed to haul massive logs, was crippled. Both rear tires, heavy, thick-treaded rubber, were slashed, not with a knife, but with what looked like giant, jagged punctures. And not just sliced open, but the steel reinforcement belts inside were pulled out, twisted like spaghetti, and left draped over the slashed rubber. I walked around the machine, my heart sinking into my boots. This was personal. This was directed. A bear doesn't have the dexterity or the motive to ruin $8,000 worth of specialty tires. "It's not just big, Finn," I said, my voice hoarse, feeling the full, crushing weight of isolation and fear. "It's smart. It knows what we need to get out of here. It's taking our mobility." Finn nodded slowly, his face etched with a familiar, weary sadness. "The woods are telling you to leave, Jake. You keep pushing, the woods push back harder. It warned us with the noises. It warned us of the dents. Now it's warned us with the destruction. The next warning." He didn't finish the thought. He didn't have to. We all knew the next warning would be final and probably fatal. Marcus, however, was in a frenzy. He was red-faced, shouting about insurance, about the cost, about some environmental terrorists were doing this. He couldn't accept the implication of the damage, the sheer impossible strength it suggested. He couldn't accept that something non-human, something ancient, was watching us, judging us. "We fix this," Marcus roared, spitting into the dirt. "We patch the damn tires, we work twice as fast, and we pull every stick of timber we came for. We are not getting run out by some hippies." We spent the rest of the day in a hopeless daze, trying to make makeshift repairs, fueled by adrenaline and spite. The sun set on a broken camp. 4 men huddled around a sputtering fire, 3 of us terrified, 1 in denial, and 1, Finn, just waiting for the inevitable.
The air the next morning was unnervingly clear, almost sparkling. It felt like the calm before a storm, or perhaps the complete, patient stillness of a trap. We were jittery, our movements sloppy. We were running on maybe 3 hours of sleep, haunted by the memory of the immense, silent presence that had stalked our camp hours earlier. Marcus, desperate to prove he was still in control, decided we needed to drop the biggest tree on our claim, a colossal, 150-foot Douglas fir, ancient and stubborn. "We take this giant out," he said, forcing a grin, "and we'll feel like men again. Get that saw going, Ben. Jake, get your wedges ready." The work on a tree of that size is methodical, dangerous, and requires absolute precision. Ben and Marcus started the undercut, the massive engine of the saw screaming into the morning, the sound momentarily drowning out the silent threat of the forest. I stood ready with the steel wedges and a heavy maul, waiting for my cue to start driving them in to direct the fall. Something was wrong. The air was too still. The smaller birds that usually flitted through the canopy were absent. Even the insects seemed to have gone quiet. The overwhelming sound of the chainsaw felt alien, an intrusion. Marcus yelled, indicating the undercut was deep enough. Then switched to the back cut, starting the main cut on the opposite side. The tree began to moan, a sound like a ship tearing apart. "Wedge! Wedge!" Marcus screamed over the din, pointing at the gap. I lifted the maul, ready to strike, but before I could swing, the scream of the tree intensified into a tearing roar. The tree didn't just lean, it twisted. It was a freak accident, a rare and deadly phenomenon known as barber chair.
Instead of the cut going clean, the sheer internal tension in the wood caused the bottom of the tree to split upward violently, like a giant slingshot snapping. The trunk exploded apart at the base. The upper half of the tree, instead of falling away from us along the intended felling path, shot backward, the huge, heavy butt section whipping around with impossible speed. It happened in a blur. Marcus dove. I hit the dirt instantly. Ben, standing right at the base with the chainsaw, wasn't fast enough. The colossal butt end of the fir slammed down, not with the gentle thud of a planned fall, but with a sickening wet crunch. Ben let out a sound that wasn't a scream, but a strangled, high-pitched gasp, the sound of air being violently forced from his lungs. The tree lay across him, a single 80-foot section of pure, unmoving timber. He was pinned beneath the thickest part of the trunk, the small mangled shapes of his legs visible underneath the bark. He was alive, thank God, but barely breathing, his eyes wide and shocked, staring blankly at the underside of the tree. "Ben! Ben!" Marcus scrambled up, dropping to his knees, his face white with terror that finally overcame his denial. "His legs! He's pinned! We gotta lift it!" "No lifting that, Marcus!" I yelled, scrambling towards them. We were talking about maybe 20 tons of green timber, a section so heavy we'd need the skidder winch just to budge it, and the skidder was crippled, half a day's walk away from any chance of a tow. We grabbed the butt of the log. Ben's chest was right on the midpoint and strained. We were strong men, hardened by years of labor, but the tree might as well have been the mountain itself. Our muscles screamed, our boots slipped in the dirt, and the tree didn't move an inch. Ben only choked harder, the pressure on his diaphragm absolute. "The jacks!" I cried, running to the tool cache, but the only hydraulic jack we had was a small 2-ton model, designed for truck tires. Not this. It was worse than useless. We had maybe 5 minutes before Ben asphyxiated or his internal injuries killed him. Marcus was beside himself, weeping and pulling futilely on the lug. "Help me! For God's sake, Jake! Help me! We can't let him die! We can't lift it, Marcus! We need the winch! Finn, where's Finn?" I looked around frantically. Finn was gone. He hadn't been near the accident, having been setting up choker chains about 50 yards away. I saw him now, emerging from the deeper woods, walking towards us with a pace that was slow, deliberate, and utterly calm. He wasn't running. He was strolling into a crisis. "Get back," Finn ordered, his voice low, without inflection, yet it cut through Marcus's hysterical sobs. "Get away from the log." "What are you doing, you old fool? We need to move it!" Finn didn't answer. He just stood there, his back to the woods, his face finally showing an expression, not of fear, but of profound reverence, almost dread.
Then I heard it. Not the heavy footsteps from the night, but a new sound. The brush being pulled aside, not snapped, but yielded. And a scent, something primal, musky, like wet dog, ozone, and pine resin all mixed into a powerful, overwhelming stench that hit the back of my throat. I spun around, following Finn's gaze, looking beyond the carnage of the fallen tree, into the shadowed green wall of the old growth. And there he was. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man in a costume or some hulking ape I'd seen in a zoo. It was a creature of myth, and yet it was utterly, terrifyingly real. It must have stood 9, maybe 10 feet tall. The sheer, overwhelming bulk of it was what hit you first, a massive, perfectly sculpted cylinder of muscle, covered in deep, reddish-brown fur like dark, dried clay. The shoulders were impossibly broad, wider than the hood of our skidder. It walked on 2 legs, but the movement was fluid, effortless, and powerful, covering the distance from the wood's edge to Ben in maybe 3 long, silent strides. Its head was large, cone-shaped, set low on those massive shoulders.
I never saw its face clearly. Not really. It was shadowed, and I was too stunned by the sheer scale of the being to focus on details. But I felt its eyes. They weren't angry, but focused, immense, and ancient, fixed entirely on the fallen tree and the pinned man. Marcus made a choked noise, a sound of absolute, immediate mental breakdown, and collapsed backwards into the dirt. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My brain refused to process the image of the creature standing over Ben, the very air around it seeming to warp with heat and power. The creature crouched. The movement was slow, deliberate, almost gentle. It placed its colossal, thick-fingered hands that looked like dinner plates with knuckles like granite, on the log right above where Ben's chest was crushed. I saw the muscles bunch and ripple across its back, like ropes under its fur. There was a sound, not a grunt, not a cry, but the low, stressed groan of compressed air. The deep, grinding noise I'd heard on the first night, amplified tenfold. Then, with an ease that belonged only in nightmares, the creature lifted the tree. It wasn't a heave, it was a smooth, upward motion. The trunk, the enormous 20-ton cylinder of solid wood that 4 men couldn't even shake, rose maybe 4 feet off the forest floor. The ground itself seemed to sigh with the sudden release of pressure. The sight broke my perception of reality. It was a living, breathing defiance of the natural order. It held the tree aloft, steadily, for maybe 10 seconds. "Now," Finn whispered, his voice trembling only slightly. "Get him out, Jake. Now." The words snapped me out of my catatonic state. I scrambled forward, dragging Ben's limp, bloody body from beneath the suspended log. The friction of his canvas shirt on the rough bark of the tree was the loudest sound in the universe. I pulled him clear, pulling him back to where Marcus lay frozen. As soon as Ben was free, the creature lowered the tree. It settled back onto the earth with a gentle, muffled thump. No crash, no violent drop. It set it down like a mother setting a sleeping child into a cradle. Then it stood up, its massive silhouette blocking the morning sun. It looked at the fallen tree, then over at us. I expected a roar, a threat, a final attack. Instead, it turned its back. It took 4 more of those colossal, silent steps, melting into the dense brush as effortlessly as it had appeared. The only remaining signs that it had been there was the lingering, feral scent and the impossibly large 3-foot-long depression in the earth where it had just stood, and the sight of a 20-ton log resting gently where a moment ago it had been a lethal press. Silence returned, absolute and paralyzing. It was the deepest silence I have ever known. Marcus was still shaking, unable to speak, staring at the patch of woods where the creature had vanished. Ben was alive, breathing shallowly, his face ashen, but alive. His legs were a mess, broken and bleeding, but he wasn't dead. He hadn't been crushed to death under the full, sustained weight of the tree. The creature had saved him. I knelt beside Ben, checking his pulse, the raw, visceral scent of the Bigfoot still stinging my nostrils. Finn walked over and crouched beside me. He didn't look triumphant, just resigned. "It never wanted to hurt us," Finn said, his voice barely a rasp. "The warnings weren't malicious. They were fear. You break his trees, you break his family's home. You were too loud, too greedy. You wouldn't leave, so they took away your things. When you still didn't leave, and one of you got hurt, it chose the life over the lesson." He paused, looking into the canopy above the fallen giant. You think that thing that just lifted 20 tons of wood needed our help to get rid of us? If it wanted us dead, we'd be past. We were trespassers, loud and deaf to the quiet, but we didn't deserve to die for it.
Marcus finally found his voice, a broken, whimpering sound. We have to call someone. The Forest Service, the police. We have to report this. Finn shook his head, looking at Marcus with deep disapproval. You gonna tell them Bigfoot saved Ben's life? They'll lock you up, Marcus. And worse, they'll come back here with bigger guns and more bulldozers. And next time, it won't just lift the log, it'll throw the log at them. He looked at me, his weathered face suddenly solemn. This place doesn't belong to us, Jake. It never did. We took a life, the life of that tree, and the woods, or whatever that thing is, reminded us of the price. It saved one of ours, showed us its power, and walked away. That's a deal, Jake. You don't break that deal. I looked down at Ben, then at the impossibly bent steel wedge back at the camp, then at the massive five-toed print pressed into the soft earth. The denial was gone. The fear was replaced by an awe so vast it was religious. We leave, I said, the words heavy and final. Now, we leave Ben what money we can spare, and we get him out of here, and we leave everything else behind. We spent the next 6 hours doing the only thing we could, building a crude stretcher, stabilizing Ben as best we could, and beginning the long, desperate hike out of the woods. We left the skidder, the destroyed saws, the tents, and all the cut timber. We left the entire operation. It was a fortune we walked away from, a mountain of profit left to rot. But as we struggled through the silent, oppressive woods, carrying Ben, the weight of the loss was nothing compared to the clarity we had gained. We weren't conquerors of the wilderness. We were guests, and we had been explicitly, miraculously, and terrifyingly given permission to leave. We didn't look back. We didn't speak of it again until we were in the sterile, loud, brightly lit emergency room 48 hours later. Ben lived, thanks to the impossible intervention of a creature no one would ever believe existed. He never worked in the woods again. Marcus quit logging and moved inland, never speaking of that day, the denial forever shattered by the raw sight of impossible strength. Finn, of course, vanished back into the mist. He had known the whole time. And me? I walk city streets now, working in construction. I still smell the pine and the musk in my sleep. I still see that impossible strength in the dark. I know, without a doubt, that we were spared, not because we were lucky, but because a thing of immense power, guarding its ancient sacred home, showed us mercy. We took his lumber, but he returned our man. It was a trade, and we paid the ultimate respect by never returning to the cedar line, leaving the heart of the ancient forest to its rightful, silent guardian. We never broke ground there again. The woods won. And honestly, it was the only time in my life I've been truly grateful for a loss.